Amen.
That's why when he said something about doing hymns first, I'm like, well, I want to know what I'm getting into before I start talking. And that fills you in right about there, where you're at. I'm just kidding. So, it's really neat to be here. I've done this talk about a dozen times in the Kentucky Baptist Association. A couple years ago, before all this COVID stuff started shutting down our programs and that, I did this a few times around the state. And the same slides that we're going to put up tonight are the ones I went through with that. There may be some decent info in there. Just if you want a copy of these, let me know, or let Brother Abram know. He can forward you the email. I don't mind you doing that. They're just in a PDF file or a WordPerfect file, rather. Excuse me. But like he mentioned a minute ago, this is something that's near and dear to my heart. And it's funny when I give this talk in other places. Part of the introduction, I have to kind of give people the backstory and talk about the flood, and I don't have to do that here. It's kind of cool, because this is where actually a lot of this all started. So I just have my slides on here when I'm looking at it. It's just that if I can't read it because my eyes are getting bad, I got it on here too. So I am getting older. I don't know if anybody realizes this. When I started here in 1996, I was 27 years old when they turned me loose on this town. So y'all got a really young one when I started. I'm going to talk about myself just a little bit first because, I think, Paul talks about in his letters, he talks about, what authority do you speak from? Of course, I speak from the authority of Jesus Christ in the end, but you need to know the person that's talking to you. And I know a lot of you guys, but you need to know by what authority that they're telling you what they're telling you. And I just want to walk through my walk with you guys just a little bit. So I started down here in 96. The flood hits in 97. And I was really young, really green. I knew my stuff. I knew what was in the books great. My skills I felt were good, but, I had a lot of maturing to do. 27-year-old doctor. You just watch TV. That's, all the TV shows are about 27-year-old doctors, right? Right, they are. One of the things that happens to you in a walk through into that kind of training is you get increasingly worldly in your thinking and your pattern, and you start to really trust on your own intelligence and your own understanding of things. And it's not uncommon for young physicians to be, actually probably more common than not, for young physicians to increasingly espouse a secular worldview. And I was as guilty as that. I see one particular guy back here I knew way back when I knew through this time, and he probably never knew the doubts I had at the time, but I think they were obvious to people that got close to me. I wasn't in a real good place. I would claim to be a Christian, but I was slipping further into agnosticism, and I said, okay, fine, cool stories, guys. But, and I'll tell these stories to my kids so that they're not afraid when they go to sleep at night. But I don't think I believed it. So in the late 90s, I was really struggling with this faith crisis. And about the same time, like I said, the flood hit, and I kind of wanted to be like Doc Hollywood when I came back. You remember that movie with Michael J. Fox? Where he went into the town and the old country doctor kind of kicked him into shape? Well, I got a little bit of that from Doc McKinney, but he wasn't around long enough to get me into good shape there. But I thought, like I said, I came in thinking I was a hot shot. I came in and I wasn't in a good place here and even here. And I questioned him a lot. I said, well, like a lot of agnostics do, something's there, but I don't know what it is. And the reason that's important is in a second, is that about this, when the flood hit, the drug and alcohol unit was just about to close down. They were paying this doc from Cincinnati an incredible amount of money to drive down here 3 days a week and sign off on charts, so the nurses were doing all the work. And when the numbers dropped, they couldn't afford to pay this guy anymore. And so the St. Luke, if y'all probably know, my first office was a joint venture between Patient First and St. Luke. St. Luke renovated the space and built the office, and Patient First paid me, and they worked that out. And if you guys know Don Salinger, he was technically my boss. He was the CEO of Patient First. And St. Luke came to me and they said, we want you to go work a couple hours a week at the drug and alcohol unit. And I'm like, I ain't going to pick these people. I don't want to do that. As a matter of fact, I wouldn't take that office until they put, if you notice that from the back where the office was and where the drug and alcohol unit is, there's a nice heavy concrete wall separating them, that's because I wouldn't promise to come there until they put that wall up. And you're thinking, you say, wait a minute, isn't he talking about treating this? Where's he going with this? I want you to know this is the place I started from. So they came to me, and Sandra pulled me aside and said, look, you're going to do this. Because if you don't, they're going to bring another doctor in here. And what they'll do is they'll just kick you out of your office. We'll have to find somewhere else to put you. And they'll just, you're going to lose your spot. You don't want to compete with somebody St. Luke brings in here. So my arm is twisted to go over there. And so I'm drawn into this job that I didn't want as an agnostic who didn't care about the problem and didn't want to be there doing it. And something changed in my heart over that time. That's when I actually, there's so many different things going on in my life, but I got to tell you, one of the main ones was I had patients there that, I started seeing the ones that got better had something different than the ones that didn't. Just being honest, So I'm looking at it backwards. I'm seeing, okay, I'm the doctor, I'm supposed to be telling them what to do to get better, and I'm watching the ones that get better, and they're getting something different. So I started asking them, what are you doing different? And they start telling me about Jesus Christ. So patients start witnessing to me. Okay? You don't think what you say to people can make a difference. Patients started witnessing to me. And so I had this, and I was just telling Brother Abram this before service. If you guys ever read Blackaby's Experiencing God, it's kind of an old classic now, but if you haven't, read that book. Blackaby's great. It's about your faith walk. But he talks about when you have this just overwhelming experience where God finally it kind of hits you over the head with your crisis of belief, your moment of belief. And I remember, like I said, my big problem was intellectualism. And I can tell you the moment that hit me, I was in a hotel room in Chicago on an addiction conference, actually doing the schooling work to get certified in this. And I was sitting there, my TV didn't work. The weather was terrible because it's Chicago. If you've ever been there, it's always terrible. And TV didn't work. I didn't want to go down to the bar in the hotel and have a drink. I didn't want to do any of that. And that Gideon's Bible's sitting on the dresser. And I'm like, I'm not going to open that. And you ever do this? You find yourself actually saying, no, I'm not going to do that. Like, who am I talking to? And I'm literally saying this to him. I'm not going to pick that up. So finally, in frustration, I don't know if you've ever done this, I picked this Bible up and I flipped it open on the bed and I said, fine, what is it you want me to see? And as sure as I'm standing here, the page I opened it to was 1 Corinthians 1:19. It says, I will destroy the wisdom of the wise, the intelligence of the intelligent I will frustrate. And it's like I felt this hand on my shoulder that said, little man, because I think when God talks to me, it's always like Isaiah, right? Little man, if you're going to reduce me to something that fits inside that little head of yours, we got problems. And I wandered in that for a little bit. I started seeking, and I looked into Buddhism, I looked into Mormonism, I looked into the witnesses. I checked it all out. And I finally started taking seminary classes. I got 2 to go, and I'm actually allowed to preach, which is scary. But, I think I did like 14 of the 16 that you do through the correspondence course. And I don't know if y'all know Mark Whiteford up in Alexandria. He taught the majority of those. And my Romans class, when we got to about chapter 6 through 9 in Romans, if you read the Bible a lot, that hangs a lot of people up in there. That whole election stuff and everything. And Mark pulls me aside after class. It's like our 4th class. He said, you're going to have a big problem, dude. I'm like, what? He said, you're making it all about this. You're demanding God fill this. And he wants this first. He's not going to give you this on your demand. So that's when I started seeking. And I spent more and more time with these addicts, if you want to call them that. And I started finding my calling. It was kind of like Jonah in the whale. I was going to run from it at first, but then I get put into it. And actually, I found that being the thing that edified my faith. I could do a whole hour on that. I won't. I know y'all want to go home, and your coffee pot's probably set to go for 7:31, so we're going to get you out of here. But one of the first things I realized when I took a good look at addiction is that this is spiritual warfare, man. The devil's hands are all over it. And I get to this point where I'm thinking, okay, there really is a devil. Because, I mean, the attack plan, the things that take people down, it's the same time after time again. And you see this organized approach. And I came to believe in the devil. And I remember saying, okay, you got to be real. Because if that's loose in the world, we got to have an answer for it. And, you know, there was just patient after patient. I could go on. One of them is the church administrator of my wife's church up in Kenton County. And she was one of my first Suboxone patients, one of the worst addicts I ever treated. And she'd actually, you know, she's basically behind the pastor running a church up in Kenton County. So some of these folks just really had a touch to me. But the more I get into this, I start seeing that, you know, we have this big problem in America today, right? That it's either you believe in science or you believe in God. And people want to put these two in opposition, and they're not in opposition. It actually flows very, very, very well together if you just take a step back and let God speak to you about it a little bit. Do you guys, anybody see those debates with Ken Ham and Bill Nye the Science Guy? One of Bill Nye's things is, geez, that's a bad one. One of Ken Ham's big things is a truth that stares you in the face is going to be affected by your perspective. In other words, your preconceived notions when you start are going to affect the determination you make. So if you observe something, science is about observation, right? You see something happen, you try to figure out what caused that to happen, then you come up with ways to test your hypothesis about why it happens that way. That's what science is. That's the scientific method, right? Somewhere along the way, somebody said, well, I think this is how this got here, and that becomes the truth. And that's not the scientific method. But there's nothing in science that really contradicts God. Now, people's interpretations of science might contradict God, right? And that's what Ken was trying to say. You know, a lot of people say, oh, if we're going to debate God, you got to come in with an open mind. Well, you're not. Nobody ever comes into a conversation with God about God with an open mind. You're either for or against. It's impossible to come in with an open mind in that situation. Your emotions are playing a role. So that was the heart before the head. You know, I had to give that heart to get the head. And in His timing, God has slowly answered my questions, and it's good. I feel at peace with it. But, so we're going to talk a little bit about brain chemistry. One more slide there. I'm sorry. I should be telling you when I'm switching. This is Brain Chemistry 101. We're going to do a little walk here because I promised some meat to this, right? So the next slide, are all addictions equal? Yes or no? Because AA will often tell you, and I'm not knocking AA, I love AA, right? I'm a huge proponent. Those 12 steps are a list of things to do in order to fix your brokenness. By the way, Jesus is all over those 12 steps. They want to put words in there like God as I understand Him to make it softer for people who have daddy issues with God. But the reality is the 12 steps are all about God. Jesus is in every one of those. The higher power in step 1 and 2 is God. Period. We're not going to shove that down your throat in the beginning, just like we don't shove a Bible down your throat when you walk into church the first time. But that's the truth, guys. I'm going to tell you. So, are all addictions equal? AA will tell you yes. Not really. That's the answer. Now, any addiction is going to have the same. There are some of the same effects on your life. It's going to make you cranky, not relate to people, cause a brokenness. But when you break down the actual addiction to different chemicals, they're vastly different in the brain, okay? What opiates do, you know, when I say opiates, right, it's either pain pills or heroin or fentanyl. Opiates are different in a lot of ways than alcohol. They're different from crack or meth, different from benzodiazepines like Xanax. They're affecting different things in your brain. Next slide, please. And where I didn't put up a real nice brain picture, right? This is supposed to be science, so here's your brain picture. There's actually a couple more coming. But the brain is really divided into two sections, if you will. There's a part that you can control, and there's a part that you don't control, consciously, right? So the outer part, the cortex, that's where your thinking occurs. That's what you say, I'm going to smack this podium, I smack the podium. That's in the outer part, the cortex. The limbic system is that part that's in the inside, that core. If you ever, like in biology class, took a fish brain apart and looked at it, or a frog brain, they have almost the same structures, right? Because the function of the limbic system is instinct, fear, memory, emotions. They lie in there. You don't really think about those, they just happen. Bodily functions such as your heart beating. Do you think about your heart beating? Do you take a breath? Do you think to take a breath? No, it just happens. All this stuff happens in the limbic system. It's below voluntary control. Next slide. So, one of the first things I'll talk about when I talk to patients is I'll say, we got to understand what receptors are. Making a little bit of a jump here, but I want you to understand that, like, your brain is a biochemical computer. That's basically what it is. It's the most fantastic computer ever invented, but it's a biochemical computer. Instead of circuits, chemicals do the work. This chemical binds to this receptor, it causes something to happen all over your brain simultaneously. You tell me that something other than a God could. You're going to tell me that that's developed over 1 billion years in a fish pond? No, I'm sorry. It just doesn't. It's crazier to believe that evolved on its own than it is to believe in a creator, but that's another argument entirely. So these receptors, think of them like this. Receptors are like the lock on a door. And the neurotransmitter or the chemical is the key that fits in the lock, that turns it, makes it open. Does that make sense? So there are different kinds of neurotransmitters in your brain. There are norepinephrine, epinephrine, dopamine, serotonin. But there's one group particularly called endorphins. And the job of endorphins depends on, if you look at the next slide real quick, I may go down and go back up. But endorphins have 3 basic effects in your brain. They affect the limbic system and some functions there. And when you sit down at the end of it, when you hug your grandkid, you get that all's well in the world feeling. That's usually an endorphin-mediated response in your limbic system. I think you understand that whole big statement now with what I just said, right? Endorphins are released, they bind to certain locks in the system, they open the door, and things happen. You get this pleasurable experience. In other places, in the brainstem further down, it controls functions like, it can affect functions like breathing and heartbeat, which is why in an overdose of opiates, you stop breathing. It's not that you don't think about it. So opiates basically replace endorphins as the key that turns the locks. So instead of letting these naturally occurring endorphins that are in your body turn the locks like they're supposed to, we're going to slam the locks open with this thing that's 1,000 times more powerful. That's what opiates do to your brain. Okay? That's a little different than what alcohol does. Alcohol actually does stimulate the opiate receptors to a small degree. And we may take advantage of that in treatment. But what gets you drunk is a different effect. So alcohol is not chemically the same as an opiate is. Everybody with me so far? Lost anybody? I hope not. I don't see anybody asleep. I don't see anybody not. So that's good. All right. So what these endorphins do, like I said, is they regulate these functions. When we take an opiate, we have those effects I said a minute ago on different parts of the body. And that becomes important. Now, if you wanted to raise your own endorphins, in this slide, it doesn't show up really good here, I apologize. So, what this slide says, let me show them the right one. It says the role is emotional, physical pain relief, pleasure, reward, numbness when needed. There's times we need to get emotionally numb, right? And that's one of the things that the addict learns early on, is they stop reacting to things in their environment, and they're using the drug to get numb so they don't have to deal with it. So that's a barrier we have to overcome when they get sober. Right? I can sober you up, I put you on stuff, but every time something upsets you, if you're going to want to get numb, we've got to retrain that. So it's not just medically taking care of it, if you follow me. Symptoms of low endorphin, you're sensitive to pain, you're emotional, you're chronic pain. One of the things that happens to people coming out of opiate addiction is they don't always start making endorphins again. In other words, when you're taking drugs, you suppress your endorphin function. You hope that when you stop taking drugs, the endorphins come back. What if they don't? Well, you're going to feel pain a lot more. You're going to be chronically depressed, emotional, irritable, cranky. Guys, sometimes people need to stay on medication long term. Like one of the drugs I use is Suboxone. If you ever wonder what Suboxone does, remember I was talking about those keys going into the lock? Suboxone is a key that goes in the lock real nice, but it won't turn it. You ever have a key that was made by that kid at Home Depot, didn't cut it right, and it won't turn? That's kind of what Suboxone is. It fills the lock, but it won't turn it. So 98% of people don't get high on Suboxone. There are a few people that do, but it's not the same kind of high. They might tell you it is, but they can't even overdose on Suboxone by itself. You cannot overdose on Suboxone unless you're taking something else with it. I mean, there are overdoses on people on Suboxone, but they're taking other things with it. The Suboxone itself will not take you to the level that will make you stop breathing. If you wanted to get your endorphins up, there's some dietary changes you can make that are on here. You could take some supplements like phenylalanine, but don't do that if you have high blood pressure, or PKU, or some other issues. That's just a neat little slide that I've had for a long time. I thought I'd put it up there. So let's go a couple ahead here, if I can get my thing to play ball here. There we go. So, when we say an agonist, just kind of backing this up again, this slide here, and it didn't show up as well as I'd hoped, but see those little green areas on the brain? Those green areas are limbic system. So, an agonist is a key that turns the lock. It refers to the drug or the neurotransmitter, right? So the key that goes into that lock, an agonist stimulates and antagonist blocks. So something like naltrexone or Vivitrol is a blocker of that lock, whereas Suboxone is a key that doesn't work right. And heroin, methadone, Percocet, they're all keys that turn the lock. Methadone is used because it turns the lock, but it does it real slowly. So it takes like 8 to 12 hours to get the full effect of it. So you dissociate that feeling high from taking the drug, at least a little bit. It has its use, and I don't put everybody there, but sometimes it helps people. We're going to talk about that in a second. Go to the next slide. We kind of skipped this, but I'll do this one real quick. This just tells you if you're taking opiates every day and you stop, what the timeline is. If it's a short-acting opiate like heroin or Percocet, within 6 to 12 hours, you're going to start feeling some symptoms. Something longer like methadone or OxyContin, which is a sustained release, might take you up to 30 hours. But the side effects you normally get are nausea, vomiting, stomach cramps, diarrhea, goosebumps, depression, cravings, flu symptoms. It's not fun. So let's jump ahead. That's about enough of the physical stuff, right? I beat you up with all this brain chemistry. Let's talk about psychologically for just a little bit. I'm going to tie this all together in a minute. Psychologically, what happens? Well, you guys had psychology classes before? Anybody had a psychology class? You remember when they talked about Ivan Pavlov, the Russian guy in the 19th century? He did this really neat experiment, right? What he showed is that if he rang a bell and fed his dog, rang a bell, fed the dog, eventually ringing the bell causes you to, the dog, he's all ready to eat, right? That's how you train an animal. Well, we train ourselves as well. The triggers that we have when we're using drugs are trained the same way. That process is called operant conditioning, but it's a good... next slide, please. So, that's where your triggers come from. Next slide. So if you take that dog and you've trained it to salivate when you ring the bell, what happens if you ring the bell and don't feed it? Eventually that behavior will extinguish itself, right? But here's the kicker. Take that dog where you've trained it, you've extinguished the behavior. 6 months later you retrain it. Does it train faster? Yeah. There's memory in there. See, this whole thing that I just described takes place in that limbic system. Right? So if you've trained something in the limbic system, trained a response in there, how easy is it for that organism when you say, just don't do it? You guys follow me on this? So, what's happened is, with the addict, kind of in a nutshell, is they've trained their brain to do something their brain has trained them on a subconscious level. And we have this attitude sometimes with them like, why don't you just stop? They would if they could. You know, I used to do a lot of town hall meetings, and one of the things that people would say, I would hear this all the time, and I almost got numb to it. People would say, well, they did this to themselves. So did a lung cancer patient 95% of the time, right? Do we not treat them? I mean, where does that stop? That's going to be your excuse, right? What I would ask people at that point, I would say, whoever did anything stupid when you were young? You don't have to raise your hands if you want to. You can. If you want to brag about it, raise your hand. What if it trapped you? Right? What if you got stuck by that? See, we'll get to this in a little more detail in a minute, but it's the folly of youth. But, you know, everybody gives a testimony is going to tell about when they were a bad person, when they were lost, when they didn't have Jesus. We all did things we're not proud of or shouldn't be proud of. But what if you can't get out of it because now it's turned into a physical blocking in your brain, and your brain isn't working? Okay, so next, please. This isn't coming in good at all, but I'll tell you what these bubbles are. This is something called the cycle of change. It's what everybody that goes through a major, whether it's eating too much, pornography addiction, sexual addiction, alcoholism, whatever. This is the steps that you generally go through when you're trying to fix yourself, hopefully. The top of the circle at 12 o'clock says pre-contemplation. Pre-contemplated person is the one that says, I don't really have a problem. Yeah, I dabble in it. Sure, I drink it. I drink too much. And yeah, I got a DUI, but that's because the officer was being a jerk. I don't have a problem. Leave me alone. Anybody know that guy? You know? I know a lot of those guys. The next is contemplation. The contemplative is one who says, okay, I admit that I have a problem. Just leave me alone. I'll fix it. If you just get off my back, I know what I need to do. I'll take care of it. So they're admitting there's a problem, but they're not buying into your treatment. The next one down, the next two down really are more what we call action. Okay, in the action stage, preparation and action, and it's usually like the bottom middle line, action. Action is that person in an AA meeting that says, I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired. That's a good spot to be in, right? Because almost anybody can be walked out of the darkness in that stage. Because they're willing to do whatever you tell them. Right? The pre-contemplative and the contemplative are not very easy to treat. As a matter of fact, when I started the drug and alcohol unit, we kind of just assumed that those guys weren't going to make it. If somebody was acting contemplative, they weren't. We'll see them again. They'll come back. And with alcohol, you can wait on that, right? You wait till it's fine. You know, you want to wait till your wife leaves you and you're divorced and everything else. You know, the world will get you eventually. You're going to come back to being in the action stage. The problem with opiates is they die first. Okay? If you're going to wait for that old mentality in the abstinence-based treatment programs, let them go. Just keep coming back until when they get it, when they're finally ready for treatment, they're going to come back. They don't need anything. Just keep, kicking them out and kicking them to the curb and letting them go. I already told you they're dealing with something physical in their brain that they can't control. Now, unfortunately, to get anywhere with them in treatment, I do need them to progress in this circle. And this is where everything really forms a compromise. Because I will admit, people are not going to move from one stage to the other except for the things that happen to them. You know, you don't move from contemplative to action until you're tired of going to jail. Until you're tired of the stuff that happens to you happening. Until you decide, I want your help, right? If I'm giving you a script for Suboxone and you're selling it to buy dope because you're not there yet, okay, that's going to be hard to treat. And that's somebody who might die. So I'm really nervous. You know, when I say to people all the time, they're like, oh, I don't want them to be on that medicine. I don't want to be on that stuff. If you brought your 30-year-old kid to me, or 25, whatever, and I examined them and evaluated them, I said, your kid's got stage 4 cancer. And they are going to be dead in 10 years. I have chemotherapy. Now, they'll have to take it every day. I don't know if it's going to be for the rest of their life or for short term, but as long as they are on it, and they do what I ask them to do, they're not going to die. Anybody got a problem with that? Hope not. Let me change 2 words. Change cancer to heroin dependency and chemotherapy to Suboxone. I was like, whoa, hold on, Doc. No, I'm not, because everything else I just said is true. The average addict is dead within 10.4 years of picking up the needle if we don't do something to intervene. So waiting on them to just get sick enough that they're ready to help. No, you got to stay on their butt. And there's one person here I was talking to earlier about that. I won't throw you under the bus, but stay on their butt. Okay, stay on them. Because that's the only thing we can do. We got to push that through the circle. Then they get to maintenance. Maintenance is, kind of where they're doing what they're supposed to. They're doing their meeting groups. If it's taking medicine, it's whatever has to happen. Unfortunately, sometimes in this circle at about 10 o'clock there's relapse. Relapse is part of the circle for a lot of people. Hopefully we put an end to that and they stay in maintenance forever, but not everybody does. And we have to address that. One thing I would say about relapse is notice that the arrows all go forward, none of the arrows go backwards. So if you're in maintenance and you relapse, you don't go back to maintenance, right? You got to go through the circle again. And it's a mindset. I have a lot of people that say, well, I used, you just give me my medicine, just give me a pass this time, I'll be clean next month when I come in, I promise. You know, don't make me go back through IOP again, don't make me do this stuff again. Well, you know what? You got to go through the whole process again mentally. You got to start back at step 1 and 2 with your sponsor. You need to reevaluate this. You got to start over, because if you don't, you're not going to progress any. So, all right. So we've talked about physical. We've talked about psychological, basically. You see, there's a pattern here, right? Let's go to the next slide. Let's talk about what we're all interested in the church and the spiritual connection. I hope I don't get ran out of here on a rail. People ask what denomination I am. I'm Baptist at heart, but I was telling them I'm an Orthodox Catholic Baptist Methodist Episcopalian. Because the way I came to faith is I think I went through just about every denomination, but I find myself attracted to. What I like about the Baptist faith is the adherence to scriptural truth. That's what draws me to this, but the reason I mention that is that there's this 4 doors. It's actually kind of a Pentecostal thing, so I don't want to. But I like this description because it's great. If you've ever heard of, now I know some are really against sozo counseling. If you've ever heard what that is, doing a sozo, it's like a session where a trained sozo therapist they'll bring in a room that's dark with soft candlelight, and the whole idea is to get you in a calm, close connection to the Holy Spirit, right? Because that's the Pentecostals are big on this whole Holy Spirit connection thing, right? And I like that, actually. It is. I'm not going to start speaking in tongues, I promise. I don't do that. Never have. But that's not going to happen. If you're waiting for that, it's not going to happen. But the idea here, and I love this, is a great explanation, is that we have 4 main doors that the enemy attacks us through. And most of us have an excessive vulnerability to at least one of those. The idea of a sozo is identify your weak door and close it. Have the Holy Spirit seal it. That's the whole thing of a sozo counseling session. And those 4 doors are, for your benefit, fear. How many things do we do? How many times we stay stuck in our sin because of fear? Lust. It's a big one. Takes a lot of people down. Offense. And I'm going to tell you, this is my biggest one right here. Some people would have told me it might be one of the others, but this is my biggest one. I get offended real easy. People that know me and want to get me started, know they can draw me off. Did I turn it on? No. I put my hand on my mouth. I hope I didn't turn it on. People that know they want to get me going down a road is tick me off. Go ahead. Make me defensive. Put me, that's the one I have to watch. Because I will, some of the words coming out of my mouth and the things I break and things like that, it's not pretty. And, when I look at those fruits of the Holy Spirit, my grandkids were telling me that song. I love grandkids. I think that's been the thing that's calmed me down. That's the biggest thing that's enabled my fruits of the Spirit. My 3-year-old, Sammy, I got to brag on him for a second. I wasn't there, my wife was. And they've been watching these Jesus videos that she does with them during the day at home. She keeps them. And Sammy looks at the waitress at Skyline up in Alexandria. And she goes, "Here, can I get you anything else?" And 3.5-year-old Sammy goes, "Did you know Jesus died on the cross for you?" And this young lady sitting there going, "Okay, thank you." And when my 3-year-old's evangelizing, I'm like, that's it. That just feeds my spiritual fruits. But my grandkids can tell you that it's fruits, right? Because they know that song. I've got a piece of them, and it goes through all of them. But, I can promise I wasn't going to sing, and I'm going to. The last one of these doors, and this is why I bring this up here, the last of the doors is sorcery. Now, you think, wait a minute, we're talking about drugs, Doc. Think about this for a minute. The Greek word pharmakia, that we get pharmaceuticals from, you know what that translates to? Sorcery. You're opening your brain. I mean, when they did their rituals in the pagan temples and everything else, drugs were involved. You're opening your brain by changing your level of consciousness. You're weakening that door. Right? So drugs are basically a form of sorcery, if you think about it. And, you don't have to, I mean, this is my opinion. These are things I put together, so you're not going to find this in a book. So if you don't agree with it, that's cool. But this is just a revelation I had a while back, and early on when I started doing this, and we really have to focus on that door of brain door of sorcery being closed. So if we can go into the next real quick, I'll pick this up. So body, mind, and spirit are all connected. And the point I'm trying to make is all aspects of this have to be addressed. If you want to help somebody, missing any of these could result in failure or relapse. If you ignore the brain chemistry, you're not dealing with someone that has the ability to respond. If you're not addressing the psychology, the habits, the triggers, the things that they've learned to do, they're going to have a hard time getting better. And if you don't address the spiritual, they don't stay better even if they get better. And again, that's my opinion. There's one true higher power. I know in AA they tell you the higher power can be anything that keeps you sober today, and I agree with that. But there's only one higher power that's permanent. Okay? If your higher power is your child, guess what? That child's not permanent. We wish they were, but they're not. If it's your spouse, if it's your friend, if it's your parents, all those are things that might get you through a day or two or three, but they're not permanent. The Holy Spirit's what's permanent. The brain is an organ, just like the heart or a liver. Telling a patient, Pastor Edwin, would you tell a heart failure patient to stop taking their meds and just pray with you? I hope not. I went on a limb asking that question because I thought I knew the answer already. So, why do we do that when this organ's not working right? Does it make sense? People are on depression medicines, bipolar medicines, and we say, you're not praying hard enough. Guys, we mess people up all the time in the church because we tell them, come to my church, we'll pray over you, and you won't want to use drugs anymore. Does God work that way? Does he perform miracles on command? No, he doesn't. Now, I've seen him do it. I've seen him wave his hand and take somebody's craving away. It's not that it doesn't happen, but it's his discretion. It happens for some, it doesn't happen for others. Does that mean he abandons them? No, it doesn't. But sometimes there's a fire they need to walk through. I love that old analogy preachers use over and over about gold being refined in the fire. And that's perfect because the impurities need burned out. The reality is, for a lot of people, there's got to be some fire to walk through or this isn't going to change. There's other parts of it, the behaviors, the habits, are not going to change without some fire. And what God does promise he'll do is he'll walk through it with you. You're not alone walking through it. So just kind of remember that, because what happens is when we tell people that all they got to do is come in and pray, when they come in and they still want to use drugs a month later, 2 months later, and we're ignoring, in Romans 6, 7, 8, when it says the spirit wars against the flesh, what I want to do, I don't do, what I don't want to do, I do. You're kind of ignoring that when you tell them that, right? But what we do is we actually hurt them, because they think one of a couple of things. When it doesn't happen, they think to themselves, well, God doesn't love me, or God's not real, or I'm just not good enough. Right? And that's not, none of those are the truth. Now, we are to not tolerate sin. We're to hate sin, but we're to love the sinner. He's pretty clear in John 8 who judges sin, who's in charge of it, right? So we got to remember that part. Lovingly lift people up, but the reality is they're still going to have cravings, they're still going to have problems. You got to pray with them. Eventually God will show them ways, and it's different for everybody. The path to God is personal, it's different for everybody. So next slide. I kind of covered this a little bit, and we can pop on to the next one real quick. The last thing I'll leave you with is that blaming this as a disease. One more slide, one more, thank you. So, to really, as a doctor, to treat this, I had to accept that this is a disease. A few years ago, and if you guys follow politics, we had Senate Bill 192 passed. It had a lot of things that helped us treat people that were with addictions. But I got to tell you, that bill was hard to pass. Narcan was part of that legislation. 10 years ago, it was illegal to give these Narcan kits out. We had to get a state law changed so we could give people Narcan kits to save lives. Because people are like, we can't do that. Should you wait for, well, if we wait till the squad gets there, they're dead. They stay dead. So I had a lady one time, and like I said, I used to do these town halls. And again, this is earlier in my faith walk. And this lady, she said, well, how many times do you give somebody Narcan? I'm like, what? She said, well, you know, somebody, they just keep overdosing. And they've overdosed. You've been to their house, you know, 3 times in the last month. When do you just quit doing it? And I thought for a minute, and I really wanted to tear her apart because I was angry. And again, those fruits of the Spirit kind of took over for a second, and I just went 70 times 7. So, you know, like in Matthew 18, the 491st time you can skip the Narcan. I don't think you're ever going to get there, so that's the point. I think it was Jesus' point, you're never going to get to 491, so keep going. But what kind of people would be if somebody's dead, not breathing, and we're holding something in our hand that'll restore breathing, we don't use it? What kind of person are you? Sorry. But getting better, I know where I was going, I apologize. So we had this breakfast at Brighton Center for the legislators from Northern Kentucky, the state senators and representatives. They gave me 15 minutes to teach them about medication-assisted therapy. 15 minutes, medication. I had written something, I got to give this totally to God, man, because I had written something up and I was going to try to run through it all real quick and what methadone did and what this did and what that did. I'm like, yeah, they've heard this. I'm literally pulling off the exit on the 42, 5 minutes from Brighton Center. And God said, here's what I want you to say. And I'm like, okay. I crumbled up what I threw it down and I went in and I just started talking. I said, hi, I'm Mike Kalfas. I'm going to talk to you guys today about type 2 diabetes. I'm a type 2 diabetic because of some genetic issues and some bad personal choices. I have a disease that's trying to kill me. If I listen to my dietitian, my counselor, and lose 40 pounds, 50 pounds, I may get my diabetes under control without medicine. I might not. I was going to depend on the genetics and my special situation. But I could go to my doctor and she can put me on insulin shots or pills or whatever to control my diabetes. Now, no one's going to come to me in a year and say, okay, you've had a year on your insulin, you didn't lose weight, I'm taking your insulin away. But we do that to addicts all the time, don't we, with their medicine. Now, and my transition with the legislators was, okay, I know cheesecake isn't illegal, but, so there's some differences between addiction and diabetes, but you get the point. There's genetics involved, and I could take 10 more minutes, I won't, and explain. If you're interested, ask me after. There is a genetic predisposition to this. I can show you where it is, I can tell you where it is. There's a couple genes that we know of that this runs in. Just look around you, it runs in families. You look at a generation where there's all alcoholics, their kids are all addicted to opiates. Man, there's a gene going on in there. What it is, it's a faulty mu receptor. There's a mu receptor. 1 in 5 of us carry a gene for one of those receptors in the brain that is exquisitely sensitive to opioids. So in other words, when you come across opioids the first time, it's like, whoa! And you're just obsessed at that point. And the guy that did it with you that doesn't have that gene, he's like, that was our mind. What are you talking about? So that doesn't explain everybody, but explains a lot. When I was a family doc down here, I used to ask kids, maybe I asked some of you guys, you're 18 years old, you get your wisdom teeth. I said, by the way, that Percocet, what did it do to you? Because it said it made me sleep, but I didn't want to take it anymore. I felt kind of weird on it. Okay, just, take a few. But the one that said, you know what, doc, they told me that would make me sleepy, but I took one of those, I wanted to clean the house. I was going a mile a minute, I was, there you go. Okay, you're genetically different than that other guy. So there's a genetic predisposition to this. So until this is approached with doctors and therapists and spiritual leaders, that's what it takes to get better with this. It's all the above. It's not just one or the other or the other. So I'm kind of running out. What's the next slide I got up there? Again, I kind of did that. So treatment, I'm going to just breeze through this real quick. I think I'm about done. Naloxone, that's Narcan. I gave my best example on that. I think we're at like 26 after, so I'm going to stop there. I just was going to talk about, the only thing left was to talk about specific drugs. I kind of did, or medications. I did that all as we went along. If anybody has any questions specifically, I'll answer those. That's fine. I think that's a little better to do at this point. And maybe something I said confused you or you had a question. Anybody have any questions? what's left of the slides was only going to get a little more specific about medications, but I don't know that we need to go there for this
Memory loss just come with the age?
Say what?
Memory loss just
What about?
come with age?
Memory loss can come with AIDS. Yes, it can. I think if you could pull up slide 27 for me, actually. It's one that should have like 3 colors and a guide, shadow. Yeah, that one. The question was, does memory loss come with AIDS? And yeah, that's one of the things that HIV, the virus, does cause damage. It can lead to AIDS, dementia, memory loss, other problems. Sometimes it's a side effect of the medicine. It doesn't have to be. You know, when I gave the talk, or when I was a resident 25 years ago doing my training, I told somebody they had HIV, it was a death sentence. You're going to be dead in 2 to 5 years. Nowadays, I know people have lived 20 years on the medication. We haven't cured it. Well, actually, they have cured it twice. But they've cured it from 2 people by, you know, there's a rare individual that their body the HIV virus can't bind to it, and they're immune to it. It doesn't infect them, even though they get exposed, it doesn't take root. They found people that had HIV that were bone marrow matches for a couple of those people, and they did a bone marrow transplant, and they were able to eradicate the virus. That's probably not an option for most HIV patients, but in the process of doing that, you'll learn ways to attack the virus and kill it. So, right now, we have a pretty good scorecard. If you take the triple therapy that the doc gives you, you do what you're supposed to do, your viral count will be 0, and the doctor can pretty much get it under control. That's really only been within the last 10 or 12 years that we could say that. Hep C was a big problem. It is still a big problem, but we now have drugs that will kill it like 98% of the time. So we just have to, they're very expensive. That's the big problem. We have to get the price down and get them to the people that need them. But if you look up here, this slide just basically shows that the effects of opiates, drowsiness, confusion, memory loss, fatigue, hallucinations, and convulsions, dilation of blood vessels, increased pressure in the brain, respiratory depression, pupils are constricted, slurred speech, nausea, vomiting, weight loss. That's one of the healthy signs when somebody's in treatment. You know they're doing well if they put on 10 pounds. You ever see somebody addicted? They don't eat. They can't eat. They don't want it. They'll go 3 or 4 days without eating sometimes. Then they get healthy and like, Doc, I'm putting on this weight. Sorry. I'm putting on this weight. I'm like, that's a good sign. Because when you drop 12 pounds, I'm going to drug test you under witness. Because it's a sign that you might have relapsed. The effects of using opiates. These are the medical besides overdoses and using every day. These are other things people die from. Brain abscesses, skin abscesses, infected and collapsed veins, lung abscesses, endocarditis, which is an infection of the lining of the heart. Diseases such as hepatitis and HIV. Serious stuff. I'd like to get people sober without having to clean those messes up. So, you know, we talk about needle exchange clinics. I know that's a hot topic. I can promise you no one will ever use or not use based on how clean that needle is. Right? You can go to southern states and buy a needle. Right? The dealers will sell you a needle for about $8. Do you want to trust that needle? How many people have used it before you? So giving someone a needle that's clean is only going to mean less of these things I have to clean up when they get sober. It's not, the study after study after study shows they're not going to use more drugs because I gave them a clean needle. So that's one of the fights we had to have at the state level because a lot of the legislatures do not want to have needle exchange clinics. But you know what else happens in a needle exchange clinic? They come in, they sit down and say, by the way, if you decide you want help, here's a number to call. Right? If while you're sitting there and you're doing the information with that person, and they say something to you like, you know, you're a really nice guy, what makes you care about that? My master tells me to do it. Dude, you got a door open. You know? Because that's, you know, I think when we become saved, we have this tendency we want to spend all of our life in church. Everybody goes to be a preacher, everybody wants to be in the praise band, everybody, you know. No. His followers are called to be in the world but not of the world. Yep. Now that you've got that, take it out with you. What do you tell his disciples to just wait in Jerusalem until they died? No. Acts 1:8, right? To Judea, Samaria, to the ends of the earth. Take it with you. And that's how you introduce people. Because you don't save anybody. You are never going to save a single person. You're not going to convert a single person by beating them over the head with the Bible. You know what you are going to do? You're going to introduce them to your master, and they're going to choose to open their heart or not. Period. So just by being you, that's where it goes. So anyway, we're at 7:30, so I'm going to end it here. There's a question in the back.
Is there a maximum amount of Narcan you can give someone that they...
The question is there a maximum amount of Narcan you can give somebody safely? It's a tricky question, right? Because I know that if I keep giving Narcan to someone who's not responding, the higher the dose gets, I'm predisposing them to seizures and pulmonary edema. I get that. But I would throw back as what's the consequence? Why am I giving Narcan in the first place? Because they're not breathing. So what's going to happen if I don't give them Narcan? They're not going to breathe. I'm not going to change that. So yes, there's a level, and it's usually around 6 or 7 doses. But if you're still blue, I'm going to keep going until somebody calls it. You know what I mean? And you know, I'm pushing Narcan till you get rigor mortis. I'm sorry, I'm going to push it. So, but yeah, it's not the safest thing in the world. But and here's the thing, guys: if you know anybody that gets Narcan, make them go to the ER. I know one of the patients that he lived in Bracken County, but I took care of him since he was a kid, and he had been in and out of scene. This was 4 or 5 years ago. He lived out in Bracken County, got Narcan, was awake when the squad got there. They let him talk him out of going to the hospital. 15 minutes after the squad left, he went down again. And he didn't make it. So when the squad got there, he was alive and talking. Why? Because he probably had fentanyl in his system, and sometimes fentanyl hangs onto those locks longer than the Narcan. So the Narcan knocks it off, but then the Narcan wears off, and the fentanyl comes back in and hits those locks again. Go to the hospital. We generally watch them for 4 hours. That's when we know you're safe. So you need to go to the hospital. Don't just take the Narcan and stay home. I will stick around. I don't want to. I know that people got things they don't want to respect everybody's time, so I will let everybody go at this point. If brother is okay, but I will stay around and answer any questions. So if you have something you didn't get the answer or just didn't want to say it out loud, come on up and leave.